Hey everyone, and welcome to Pagan Happy Hour. I hope you have had a wonderful week, and I am so happy it's Friday. I hope you brought a beverage with you because today we are going to be diving into the history of St. Patrick's Day. We'll be looking at the holiday from a pagan perspective. So I hope you are in the mood for that discussion. And thank you all for choosing to join me this Friday afternoon. I really appreciate all your support. If you are new here, Pagan Happy Hour is something I do every Friday at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern. And it's just a great way for us pagans and witches to chat about a topic, to share ideas and thoughts, and really have a discussion. So I will be looking over at the chat as we go along during this Pagan Happy Hour. I'm going to be bringing in your thoughts and your ideas into the conversation as much as possible. And there are two ways to support the show if you do happen to enjoy Pagan Happy Hour. The first way is through my Patreon, which I have linked down below. And if you do choose to become a patron, you also gain access to my exclusive Discord community, which is another great place to chat and share ideas and resources with fellow pagans. And the other great way you can support the show is with the Super Chats button. That's a little $sign button at the bottom of the chat box. And through that, you can donate any amount and your question or comment will pop up really big for me. So I'll be sure to bring your thoughts and ideas into the conversation. Now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. Let me cue that drink music and tell me in the comments where you happen to be watching from and what you are drinking this evening. So let's see. I'm having a bit of an Irish brew, for the theme and everything. I'm having a Smithwick's, which is actually pretty good. I'm personally not much of a Guinness fan, but I figured I had to have something Irish for today. Let me see where you all are chiming in from. Looks like we have people from Virginia, from Czech Republic, Wisconsin, Seattle, DC, Minnesota. Let's see, Charleston, not too far away from me. Let's see, Indiana, England, Illinois, Minnesota, New Hampshire. Let's see, Kansas City, Germany, Pennsylvania, Norway, Illinois, Florida, Canada, Texas, Northern California, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and Ohio. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. And this will be really great because I'm curious to hear from the Europeans that are tuning in what your thoughts are on us Americans and how weird we are about celebrating St. Patrick's Day. Because I guess from an outsider perspective, it must look quite odd. And let me turn off that drink music. And before we jump into the history of St. Patrick's Day and how it relates to us pagans, I thought I would share just something kind of unusual about where I live here in Savannah, Georgia. I recently moved here and I am very excited to experience my first St. Patrick's Day here in this city. Because if you didn't know, this small city actually has one of the largest St. Patrick's Day festivals and parades in the entire country. I think it's only second. Usually Boston has the biggest festival, and then it's Chicago and Savannah that kind of duke it out for second place in terms of the wildest St. Patrick's Day festivities. And I did live in Chicago for 6 years, so I know what their St. Patrick's Day is like, and I'm about to experience what it's like here. It should be a wild ride. But yeah, let's jump into it. I'm curious to hear all your thoughts on this topic. Now, I have discussed St. Patrick's Day and its history before on my channel. I've linked below a video I did all about St. Patrick's Day. I think maybe last year I made that video, so you can, of course, check that video out later if you're looking for more detail and history based around this holiday. But let me check your comments here. I see some of you all are chiming in. And it looks like a lot of you guys are aware that St. Patrick's Day is such a big deal here. So it was kind of a shock to me when I first moved here to learn. But yeah, and I see some people mentioning the New York City St. Patrick's Day parade is being older than the United States. Yes, that is true. I believe St. Patrick's Day festivities started in around 1737. So yeah, earlier than America when you think about it, or at least before America was America. So the Irish have had a very long and fascinating history as immigrants here, and St. Patrick's Day is just a part of that fascinating story. Let's see. Oh, a good comment here from Lorem Ipsum that says, we call it Druid Pride Day in our home. That's a really good approach there for celebrating. Let me see here. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Now, I thought I would start off with some myths and misconceptions when it comes to St. Patrick. He is, of course, one of the most famous saints in Christianity. He is one of the patron saints of Ireland, kind of along with Bridget. And Bridget is a saint and goddess that we've talked about quite a bit lately during our in bulk episodes. But just like Bridget, St. Patrick is a saint that people hold near and dear to their hearts, both in Ireland and in the rest of Christendom. But there are a lot of misunderstood things about him and his life. So I thought we could start with those in case you need any fun factoids to bring to your next St. Patrick's Day party. But one of the first things I found really amusing about St. Patrick and his life is that he's not technically Irish, which kind of comes to as a shock, right? Because he is kind of this patron saint of Ireland. But we do know he was born in Britain somewhere, most likely Wales, though some people have said it could be in England or Scotland. But definitely it was not in Ireland. And to put some time frame in here, he was born in 366 CE. So at this time, the majority of Britain was still pretty pagan. And how he kind of got wrapped up into the whole Irish aspect of him is actually a pretty sad story. He was enslaved by the Irish when he was 16. So he was taken from his home and brought to Ireland under very difficult conditions at the age of 16. And he did manage to escape. He escaped and went back home, back to England, which is where he received his religious instruction in order to become a missionary. Now, once he completed his education, that's when he returned back to Ireland to begin his missionary work. So it is kind of a interesting story, kind of imagining what his life would have been like. I wonder if he would have harbored a lot of bitterness and resentment against the Irish, considering they had enslaved him as a teenager, or if through his religious instruction, he had kind of released that anger and sadness. So, of course, we'll never know what his mindset was like, but it is a really interesting start to his story. And as we discuss more, you'll kind of see how things progress with him and his life. But let me know, did any of that surprise you? Or I know you guys are really smart, so you probably already knew that he wasn't actually Irish, but let me know in the comments if you had anything to add to that. I do have one more aspect to bring about his heritage and his family. It's also possible, according to some documents, that even though he was most likely born in Wales or England at some point, that his family wasn't actually British. It was actually part of the Roman aristocracy. So even if he was born in Britain, it's possible that he was actually part of this wealthy Roman family, because, of course, the Romans um, had occupied and were occupying that region still. So do keep that in mind. It'll get more interesting as we start talking about a Roman holiday that falls right at the exact same date as St. Patrick's Day. So just keep that in the back of your mind there. Let me see what you guys have to say in the comments. Let's see. Leah is mentioning that she went to Catholic school and she was told this story every year. So you probably are an expert in his life story. Definitely feel free to add any facts, details that you might know in the chat. I'll try and bring them into the conversation as we're going along. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so we talked about kind of his origins. Now, as we know, once St. Patrick started his missionary work in Ireland, um, there became this whole kind of mythology about him almost that we repeat today. So many stories. And one of the most popular and common things people say about St. Patrick is that he banished the snakes from Ireland. Now, this is kind of a weird thing to say, mostly because Ireland has never had snakes on the island. There never were snakes before St. Patrick, and there never were snakes after St. Patrick. There just are no snakes in Ireland. So it's kind of a weird phrase when you think about it. What are they trying to say there? We do know that St. Patrick was a somewhat successful and pretty forceful missionary. Now, there isn't definitive proof here, but it is likely that the snakes that the phrase references is actually referring to the Irish pagans. So when they say St. Patrick banished the snakes from the island, what they're really saying is St. Patrick banished the Irish pagans from the island, or he banished paganism in general from Ireland. There are several documents that state how he stood at the edge of a cliffside. He read a powerful sermon, and then he banished the snakes from the island. So there's been a lot of speculation here on what exactly that could mean. And it is very possible and likely that what he did is he delivered the sermon, and those that refused to convert were killed, or he forcibly converted the populace. Now, we don't have much information really, because the Irish pagans themselves didn't really have much of a writing culture like the Christians did. They passed down that knowledge through the oral tradition. That's something we talked a lot about in previous Pagan Happy Hour episodes when I discussed the Druids and how they shared their information and their wisdom. So we don't really have any firsthand accounts from the pagans about what it was like living during the time of St. Patrick, but we do have plenty of these kind of cryptic Christian accounts mentioning this banishing of snakes. So, what do you think that phrase means? Do you think that the snakes in this case are referring to pagans? What are your thoughts on this? Let me check your comments here. Okay, Drakara says Christianity has a long history of forced conversion. It wouldn't surprise me if the snakes were pagans in this case. Yes, that is true. Christianity does have quite a bit of a dark past when it comes to forced conversions. Um, let's see. What else are your ideas on this point here? Okay, Leah has an interesting point saying that snakes were a symbol of the devil in Christianity. Yeah, so it is possible here that maybe the snakes weren't specifically referring to the Irish pagans in general, but to Satan himself, so that he banished Satan from the island, which, of course, in his viewpoint, would mean banishing pagan belief from the island, because pagan belief was thought to be kind of satanic by the Christians. Let's see. Okay, let's see what else do you guys have to say here. Okay. Oh, Meredith in the comments says it makes sense that they'd use snakes as a comparison to pagans, since the devil also appears as a snake in the Garden of Eden. It's a good point here. Graves in the comments is mentioning how, ironically, in voodoo, it equates St. Patrick with their snake god. That is kind of interesting. Voodoo and hoodoo, kind of, especially hoodoo, where you have this kind of fusion of Christianity and voodooism. You find some really neat connections there with their deities and how they match up with different saints. So yeah, that's a great point. Okay, let's see. Okay, another comment here that says Catholicism actually became popular in Ireland after Reformation when Cromwell got backing of Spain. Um, yeah, one interesting point here is yes, St. Patrick was somewhat successful, and part of that is due to his methods that he used for converting, which we'll get into. But it's also true that Ireland was still predominantly pagan after he died. So he wasn't this huge, great success that the mythology built up around him would suggest. He did make an impact, but probably not as much of an impact as we like to attribute to him in modern day. Let's see. Okay. So I think it's interesting to point out some techniques that St. Patrick used for converting the pagans. And one of the reasons I think he was really successful, or at least somewhat successful on the island, is that he used traditions and customs that the pagans were already familiar with and already doing, kind of creating a syncretized religion in a way, which is something you see again and again and again when it comes to Christianity and paganism, especially when you're looking at Celtic paganism. Obviously, we just had Imbolc, and Imbolc being a holiday honoring Saint Bridget, or the Celtic fire goddess Bridget. In that case, they just combined the saint with the goddess, and the saint might have never even existed as an actual person. So they took an already established holiday and an already established figure and kind of just Christianized it. So St. Patrick took kind of the same approach here. He didn't right away try to fully change the festivities that the pagans were already participating in. One of the most common things that you'll see at an Irish or a British, any type of Celtic pagan celebration. Let me know if you can guess this in the comments, actually. Pop quiz. If you were stumbling upon an ancient Irish pagan festival, what would be the first thing you see? Comment below. Let me know if you guys come up with anything. Let's see. It looks like Drakara got it. The answer is a bonfire. Yes, bonfires are essential to any historical pagan celebration for the most part, especially when you're looking at Celtic paganism in particular. Bonfires were hugely important, and they still are very important today for any Celtic pagans. And it's one of the best and kind of easiest things you can do as a modern day pagan to kind of harken back to those historic celebrations. So St. Patrick noticed that pagans were celebrating with a bonfire, and particular celebrating with a bonfire around the time of the spring equinox. So when he was trying to convince people to celebrate Easter as the resurrection time of Jesus, he picked a date that people were already celebrating, and he picked a method that people were already using, a bonfire. So he was allowing the pagans to celebrate in kind of a similar way and just changing the story. So instead of celebrating the equinox in a more pagan way, you're still doing the bonfire, you're still having a great time, but you're also learning the stories about Jesus during that process. So he kind of utilized what he had around him and spoke in a language that would kind of resonate with the pagans. Another common thing you'll probably hear about St. Patrick and his methods is the use of the shamrock, which I actually have on my little Irish flag over here. And he used the shamrock to explain the concept of the Holy Trinity. So, using something from nature to describe what is really an abstract concept, something that's still for many of us difficult to get our heads around, the concept of the Son, the Father, Holy Spirit, right? But he used a natural thing that the pagans were obviously familiar with, shamrocks, they grow everywhere, to describe this aspect of Christianity. So he was using that nature imagery. He was using the natural world to tell the Christian stories. So I think that's really interesting. The last thing that he did is he took a really powerful symbol, the symbol of the sun, which for the Celtic pagans was very important, but the sun is really a powerful symbol and deity in many cases for pagan religions around the world. And he directly fused the symbol of the sun onto the cross, creating the Celtic cross. I'm sure you've seen a Celtic cross around, which is the cross with the circle kind of around it. So in that case, just like with Imbolc and Saint Bridget and the Celtic goddess Bridget, it's this fusion of Christianity and paganism. And that is what really allowed people to convert, really kind of helped convince them in a lot of ways. It also kind of helps, when you think about this, that pagans believe in many gods and spirits. So it's not difficult for pagans to incorporate another god into their pantheon. So, for example, if you were trying to convert a pagan, you would start by saying, well, just add Jesus in or add, God in. This is just one of the deities. And then over time and generations, the old gods fade out, and all that you're left with is the Christian God. So many pagans wouldn't have had an immediate adverse negative reaction to the concept of just adding in another deity into their practice. Also, money and power means something. It says a lot, and it did definitely back in the day. So, one of the ways that Christians converted pagans is by offering money and power, getting people into leadership positions, giving them wealth directly. So, still, even today, when you think about it, one of the main ways Christianity spreads is by offering wealth and power to individuals that feel disenfranchised. You really see this actually in um, history in cities like the ancient Egyptian city of Alexandria, where you had for a time a really fascinating mixture of pagans who were honoring the Greco-Roman Egyptian gods. It was kind of this weird fusion. And then you also had the Jews and the Christians. Now, how the Christians were able to take hold and upset the aristocracy that were pagan in the city of Alexandria is you had these radical monks kind of riling up the underclass and getting them to protest and riot and eventually destroy the ancient temples and all of the remaining books that survived the initial burning in the Library of Alexandria. So it took this kind of um, connection with the underclass, with the impoverished, giving them a voice. And that's what kind of helped them rise up and fuel the passions to eventually inflame a takeover and destruction of the status quo, which in Alexandria was pagans who were the aristocrats. I mentioned this before, like in a few other pagan happy hour videos, but I do think it's interesting to kind of just think about how the Christians really were able to convert over time. Same thing is true with the Vikings, where the Christians who had a lot of wealth and power at the time promised to support any leader that would convert. If you've seen like early seasons of the TV show Vikings, they kind of show this a little bit in the case of Rollo, who became a Norman king, but only if he converted first and married a Christian woman. So, kind of this, we'll give you this if you convert kind of a vibe. And that whole tit for tat, give and take type thing is just not something that pagans had on their mind. It's not really how they interact with the spiritual realm, with the old gods, with the nature around them. So it was probably quite of a shock, I think, for the Irish pagans in their first interactions with Christian missionaries. Many of them, of course, took it negatively. As we know, St. Patrick was enslaved by the Irish. Pagans by no means have a clean past. There's a lot of dark stuff that went down on both sides. But I do think it is kind of neat to think about how this conversion occurred and how St. Patrick was a significant player in this story of kind of in a larger aspect and kind of a macrocosm sense, how the Abrahamic religions took over the nature-based pagan and shamanic religions and spiritualities in the world. So let me see what you guys have to say about that. Let's see. Oh, and if you want to know more information about this kind of conversion time frame, I recommend the book The Darkening Age. I believe the author is Christine Nixie, something like that. So look up that one if you're curious and wanting to learn more. Let's see. Blaze has an interesting question in the comments asking, didn't Patrick burn pagan texts? Interesting question. My guess, and I'm not sure here. My guess is probably not, just because the pagans didn't have written material for the most part, especially when it comes to their faith. They didn't really write down rituals. that was passed down through tradition and through the oral tradition. So even now, today, one of the neat things here, what we're doing right now, this conversation, we're like our ancient pagan ancestors, we are passing down knowledge through the oral tradition. That is kind of the pagan way. And of course, books and written material is very useful. But especially if you're looking into Celtic or Norse paganism, the passing down of traditions and knowledge and wisdom through connecting with others and celebrating with them and sharing stories is really kind of the most historical way to pass down this information. So of course, online is not quite as fun as in person, but it's one of the things that really kind of makes me a bit sad about how we pagans don't have as much of a community when it comes to in-person gatherings and get-togethers, because that's really how historically people would have celebrated, shared knowledge and wisdom. Let's see. Oh, I see some of you guys in the comments have heard of that book, The Darkening Age. It's gotten a decent bit of controversy, which is interesting. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, a good comment here that says, when looking at the past, we must think about the mindset. There might be things we do today that will be considered immoral by future generations. Yeah, that's definitely true. Just as how when we look at the ancient pagans and very difficult topics like human sacrifice, if that was a thing, and all of that kind of dark stuff. It's important to think about wow, that's obviously very immoral, but also try to understand their mindset too. Just as how I know today we're doing things that future generations are going to think is absolutely horrible and immoral. So let's see. Oh, interesting question from Sarah that asks, do you know anything about how the Irish pagans interacted with disability? And also if alcohol was always associated with Irish pagan celebrations. In terms of disability, now we don't know much about this, honestly, because again, we don't have much written material. It's pretty dark, but I think most people who were born significantly disabled would not make it to adulthood. Now, some were actually part of the shamanic path. So often people who were neurodivergent historically might have been given a role as a shaman or a pagan religious figure priest. It depends on the culture. We do know that is true today for indigenous populations, where often the people that have, uh, different kind of views on things. Maybe in the Western concept, they might be diagnosed as something like schizophrenic, but in a shamanic culture, they might be viewed differently as, hey, actually, that person is tapping into a different realm, perhaps, maybe giving them a path and training in a shamanic setting could actually be good for them and could help incorporate them into our society. So that's actually a really interesting question. And of course, we don't know much about this because, again, not much is written down. But we can kind of look at how modern indigenous pagan and shamanic societies interact with people who have disabilities or are neurodivergent. So let's see. Yeah, so sometimes it's interesting, but also there's a lot of darkness there. A lot of people were killed for having disabilities. So I do want to keep that in mind, that things were not always rosy. Let's see. A question from General Arctic Fox asking, how do I join the Discord? The Discord is connected to my Patreon, so you do have to be a member of my Patreon to join the Discord. but I do hope you join. But yeah, so let me see. What else do we have here? Okay. So, another interesting point I wanted to bring up is the specific date of St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. Now, March 17th is an interesting date here, and I'll explain why. But some Christian texts say, well, that's just the date St. Patrick's died. He likely died around the year of 493, but even Christian record keeping at this early of a stage was not that great. So we don't really know specifically when he died, and we don't really know specifically that he died on March 17th. It is possible. I'll give him that. But what I think is interesting about this particular date is March 17th is the date of another pagan holiday, a Roman pagan holiday, which again is interesting. If you remember earlier on, I was discussing how St. Patrick, his family was possibly part of the Roman aristocracy. So it is kind of possible that St. Patrick was pretty well aware of this Roman holiday that fell on the 17th. And this holiday is called Liberalia. Now, Liberalia is kind of a neat holiday. It honors the god Liber. Liber is probably not a Roman god you're super familiar with, but he is akin to Bacchus or Dionysus. He is a god of wine and fertility. So Liberalia honors him, Liber, as well as his consort, Liberia, who was a goddess of agriculture and also wine. So you can see where we're going with this. We're starting to bring in this kind of drinking culture aspect, which modern St. Patrick's Day, at least here in the States, has a lot of a Liberalia vibe to it. It's almost fascinating that modern St. Patrick's Day is almost this fusion of traditional kind of life of St. Patrick stuff, but then also this ancient Roman holiday of excess and drinking. But Liberalia was not just a holiday of drinking, though there was plenty of that occurred. There was also a lot of parades and lewd songs, things like that. So almost sounds kind of similar to the chaos we get up to here in America for St. Patrick's Day. But it also had a deeper aspect to it as well. Liberalia was a coming of age festival for Roman boys. Usually, this would happen when they were 16. So, the Liberalia that falled on their kind of closest to when they turned 16 is when they would do this. But traditionally, they would remove a necklace. Now, Roman boys would wear usually a necklace that had like a leather or hollow charm. It was called the bulla prextia. Of course, I'm pronouncing this wrong because I don't know Latin, but I'm doing my best. So they would remove their necklace and then place it on the altar of the Lares. The Lares were the household gods, which were really important in a Roman pagan context. The ancestors were very important to the Roman pagans, and the Lares and the Lares altar was kind of a way that your average citizen interacted with that. So they would take this necklace off, put it on the altar, this kind of marking this transition in their life from boy to man. They would do a few other things. They would change their clothes. They would wear a different type of toga. They would go into the town square, basically announcing themselves as a full citizen of Rome at that point. They would kind of become a man, they would become eligible to vote. So it's this really interesting kind of coming of age celebration for Roman men. And on top of that, it has this aspect of celebrating fertility and fun and, just youthfulness. And excess in some degree. Um, so I think it's kind of neat that you have, St. Patrick's Day, which I'm aware in Ireland is definitely not as wild as it is here in the States. It's much more of a family celebration and a religious celebration. But here in the States, you have much more of a Liberalia version of St. Patrick's Day, where you kind of combine this celebration of Irish heritage or Irishness with this kind of ancient Roman bacchanal type vibe. So I don't know how that ended up happening. I do think it is quite interesting. Now we do know that the pagans did drink, and of course the Christians did drink as well. Monks actually created many different recipes for mead and beer, and it can be really fun to visit some of these old breweries. I went to one. Back when I lived in Prague in the Czech Republic, I went to this really ancient monastery that had a brewery that you could visit. So we know that drinking was part of not just pagan culture, but also Christian culture. Of course, usually the Christians weren't drinking to excess, so I'm sure some monks did. um, but now that we've kind of discussed the history here, how we ended up with St. Patrick's Day as we know it, I thought we could shift gears into thinking about how we should celebrate St. Patrick's Day as pagans, or even if we should celebrate St. Patrick's Day at all. After all, St. Patrick kind of represents the downfall of Celtic paganism. So, should we be celebrating this holiday? Before we get into that, let me just check your comments before we continue on. Let's see. Oh, I see in the comments there's a recommendation of doing a happy hour based on coming of age traditions. That's a great idea. I think I'll add that to a future poll for choosing the topic for a future pagan happy hour. Let's see. Okay. KL in the comments says, I think St. Patrick's is an interesting holiday. To me, it kind of represents that moment in time when Christianity officially came to dominate over the Celtic pagans and their way of life. Yeah, I think that is true, but Celtic pagan traditions have survived and persisted. Many of the ancient Celtic sites, especially wells and streams, because at least for the Celtic pagans, a lot of their religious sites were based around running water. These sites are still taken care of because they are considered now holy wells and people visit them. So even though they tried to demolish Irish paganism or Celtic paganism, it still persists and has survived in different ways. Later on, of course, in May, we'll be talking about Beltane. And of course, I've already produced some Ostara content. So these ancient holidays have also survived. Now, for the Irish in particular, they had 4 significant festivals that they celebrated, which are not at the solstices and the equinoxes, but actually the points in between. We had one recently at the start of February in bulk, and then the next one is Beltane, and then you have, let's see, Lunasa during summer, and then of course Samhain, which is the basis of modern day Halloween. So these Irish pagan festivities and traditions have persisted, have of course been incorporated into Christianity and warped and melded in different ways. But I don't think the pagan spirit or our pagan traditions will ever fully disappear. And I think one of the neat things we as modern pagans can do is to keep those traditions alive and to even revive them. in some instances. Let's see. Okay, interesting comment here from Athena's Owl that says you can use St. Patrick's Day as an opportunity to celebrate Celtic pagan culture. And yes, so getting to it, that's kind of how I am trying to deal with St. Patrick's Day in a modern context. Of course, I am not Catholic and I am not personally a fan of St. Patrick, but how it's celebrated, at least here in the States, it's not just a religious Catholic festival. It's also a way for people to celebrate and enjoy Irish and Celtic culture. So for me, I think of it as just a time that I do just that. I have a Irish drink, listen to some Irish music, read a little bit about Irish history, and connect with deities that have Irish origin. This can be a great time to learn more about the Tuatha Danann or the Fae. I have plenty of Pagan Happy Hour episodes and regular videos about Celtic paganism in general. So if you think about St. Patrick's Day as it comes up every year, if you happen to be interested in Celtic paganism, thinking of it as, hey, this would be a good time to learn a little bit about Irish folklore or Irish stories or the Irish gods. And that's how I am approaching it. So I am going to be celebrating St. Patrick's Day in the sense that I'll be attending the big parade that occurs here in Savannah. And for me, I'm trying to just kind of look at it as a celebration and a reminder of the rich culture of the Irish. Um, and especially here in America, the Irish have had such an interesting story as immigrants. I myself am part Irish when I did my 23andMe. So I am kind of interested in learning about it. But uh, one of the things someone was telling me about, why St. Patrick's Day is such a huge thing in the States is because the Irish had such a difficult time here in early America. As we mentioned earlier, St. Patrick's Day customs started really early and as early as 1737. And the Irish were kind of forced to be on their own in a lot of ways. There was a lot of, I don't want to necessarily say racism against them because it wasn't probably that, but exclusion of the Irish in early American history. One of the movies I love, Gangs of New York, shows that kind of exclusion being represented. And so many Irish came over during the potato famine that it kind of overwhelmed cities like Manhattan, and it caused quite a lot of conflict at the time. So learning about the history of the Irish here in America is kind of neat. It's an interesting story. And the reason St. Patrick's Day festivities became so popular is it was really a way for the Irish to kind of reclaim their history and their heritage and say that, hey, we're not to be looked down upon. We are strong, we are here, and we're going to celebrate. So that's kind of, the story in a nutshell of how St. Patrick's Day became so popular here. And of course, when you look at different cities that celebrated, a lot of that is based on where the Irish settled. So one of the reasons why St. Patrick's Day has such a huge celebration here in Savannah is because originally a ton of Irish came here, immigrated here. A lot of Catholics are here. Same thing with, of course, Boston, which is the number one Irish city that has a big, giant festival, and Chicago too. So yeah, I thought it'd be fun to kind of try St. Patrick's Day out in the city this year. I'm not one for excessive drinking. I do enjoy a beer from time to time, but I'm not as wild and crazy as you might think. So it should be fun. And I'd love to hear from you guys. We do have a few minutes left. So please let me know if you have questions. If you have questions about St. Patrick's Day, if you have questions about Celtic paganism, or if you just have any general Celtic questions, pagan questions, whatever, throw them in the chat. I'm going to be looking at them. If you did find any content, any history that we went over valuable, if you find Pagan Happy Hour interesting, you are more than welcome to do a super chat. That really does help support the show and keep it running. But let me see what you guys have to say in the comments. Okay, let's see what we have to see here. Aaron C. Bunsby in the comments is saying that the Irish pantheon is really complicated. Could you make a video about it? I have made several videos about Irish paganism. So if you type in Celtic paganism, or if you type in Irish Ireland in the search bar on my channel, you'll find some good content there. I've also discussed the Fae and the Tuatha Dé Danann and a lot of Irish Celtic pagan holidays, such as Beltane coming up, Imbolc, which we had recently, and of course, Lunasad and Samhain. Let's see, what else do we have to see here? Okay. Craig has a good question here. What about the leprechauns? Yeah, that's a great question. How do leprechauns get mixed up in all of this? So I actually should probably do like a separate video on this. And I don't have all the research on that yet. I need to do more. But I think it's kind of a further way that Christians, I'm looking for the word, diminished or the Irish deities. So in my Pagan Happy Hour episode about the Fae, I talked about how the Irish gods persisted after Christianization, but they kind of became the Fae or fairies. They were diminished in their role and power, kind of like with the leprechaun. So the Aushi is another term for the Fae. So with like the leprechauns, it's kind of a similar thing. You have these ancient Celtic pagan deities. Their role has been diminished, demonized. There's a word there. It's just not coming to me now. But that's kind of the idea there. So, but it's a great topic. I should look up some more research and do a future video about leprechauns. That's a great idea. Let's see. One of the TV shows that I enjoyed and one of the books I really enjoyed, American Gods by Neil Gaiman. I would check it out if you haven't yet. One of the characters is a leprechaun. And that book and TV show all has to do with the pagan gods that the early American settlers brought over, mostly from Europe, but also there's some African deities as well, and how these deities kind of came to America from these people that came here. It's a really interesting and unique concept for a story. Let's see. Oh, and I see someone's correcting me here, and yes, you're right. That the Fae or the Aushi are not technically gods, though someone would consider them gods. They were considered to be a supernatural race of beings that existed in Ireland, and then eventually they lost a series of battles to people, or like Homo sapiens. So they're kind of also considered to be this ancient magical race of people. So yeah, I think there's a lot of that kind of concept almost in like Tolkien and Lord of the Rings with like the elves and the humans and, kind of their historic battles. And the elves are kind of these ancient, powerful beings. Um, yes, I see your comments here. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me today for Pagan Happy Hour. I do hope you got some value out of this, that you found it interesting. And I hope you find a way to celebrate or not to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. It's really up to you. That's one of the great things about paganism is we really get to fully decide how we want to celebrate, how we want to incorporate our spirituality into our lives. So thank you guys so much for watching. Your support means everything to me. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me this Friday evening, and I'll see you later. Bye.